Hello, writers. Welcome back. This is lesson 2 in module 3. We're going to talk about what your brain wants and why you might be having trouble getting your bum in your chair. This is probably my favorite lesson of this whole course, actually. And I'm going to approach things from an angle that's slightly different than what you may have heard of before. So I just want you to relax and listen to what I have to say. It's not anything you need to memorize, and it might just pique your interest a little bit and enable you to look at writing and getting more written, boosting your word count just from a slightly different angle than you've ever thought of it before. So what we're really talking about in this lesson is fear, and what fear really is, and then we're going to talk about how to work around it, which of course is the whole point. So let's jump in, and this is really the premise of this lesson, that your brain is a problem-solving machine, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's what we appreciate about our brains. They were created to do exactly that. This feature of our brains is what, kind of what creativity is based on. I mean, there's that expression, necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah, I think that's it. And that's, of course, what's happening when we're creating anything new, where we're often solving a problem. However, this predisposition for problem solving can get in our way when we're trying to create something new and be creative. And we're going to talk in this lesson about why that is and how we can work around it. And so what I'm going to do first is give you an illustration of a situation that's unrelated to writing. And then after that, we're going to compare that to the situation that comes up when we're having trouble getting our bum in our chair when it comes to writing. So imagine that you're just coming home from work and that you've maybe had a difficult day. Maybe you got a flat tire on the way home. Maybe you had a fight with your boss. Maybe the traffic was terrible. And so you're feeling sort of churned up and uncomfortable. There's a lot of discomfort going on. You don't really feel like yourself. And so that's a problem that your brain sees as something that needs fixing. And so what we do normally in this circumstance, without even often realizing what we're doing, is that we reach for something that will make us feel better. So we might have a cookie, we might have a glass of wine, we might spend, an hour on social media if that's the sort of thing that makes us feel better. And what that has a tendency to do is solve the problem that we were feeling uncomfortable and bring us a little bit closer to feeling more like ourselves. And we could call that state of being home base if we wanted. And so we all have our favorite habits, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. And we all do this sort of thing all the time unconsciously. And that word is going to come up and be more important as we move through this lesson. So your brain has solved the problem. You were feeling uncomfortable, feeling lots of discomfort, feeling not like yourself, and then you did something and it created a situation or a feeling within yourself like you feel more close to that, or closer to that home base feeling that you wanted to feel. But if you've ever been on a diet or if you've ever tried to break a habit, you're going to know that what has actually sometimes happens when we do this is that we've actually created, or the solution that our brain presented to us has in turn created another problem. So let's say, for example, you were trying to break the habit of being on social media because that's not conducive to writing your book. So what you did when you got home from work feeling all disturbed was you spent an hour on Facebook. And it did end up making you feel better, but then your brain starts to berate you about the fact that you've done this thing that you said you weren't going to do anymore because it's kind of a time waster. So now you might be caught in a bit of a loop. You're kind of beating yourself up for the solution that you provided to yourself, or your brain provided to you, to make yourself feel better. And anyone who's ever been on a diet can really relate to this problem-solving loop that we get into. And being on a diet is the perfect analogy or example to show us that what our brain is doing on a, consistently, constantly, to solve problems within us. So we have a problem that we want to lose weight. We start eating in a different way, but we have a bad day or a bad moment. And so what we know to do, and what our brain knows that we can do to help us to feel better, is to reach for a favorite food. So we do that, but then we beat ourselves up because we were trying not to eat those foods because we're trying to lose weight. So as you can see, there's just this kind of loop that occurs simply because our brain is doing what it was designed to do. It's solving problems for us. And so I just want you to kind of look at that and with a little bit of a dispassionate eye, and see that it's not personal when this happens. It's simply that your brain is doing what it was designed to do. So now we can talk about how this affects your creative output, which is what really matters. So you've got that example in mind now that I've shared. And what happens when we sit down to write is that we often experience feelings of vulnerability and discomfort. And again, I'm going to use that word subconsciously. We're sometimes not even aware that this is what's going on. But creativity is a vulnerable thing to do. It's, if you're writing a book, there are chances that someone's going to read it. And that can be a very vulnerable thing. People might be critical about it. You might be comparing yourself to your literary heroes and hoping that your book is, might approach that level of accomplishment or satisfaction for the reader, and yet at the same time feeling terrified about what if it doesn't. I mean, there's just, there's a whole world of uncomfortable feelings that can come up when we start to create anything. We're creating something out of nothing, which is also uncomfortable. There's no blueprint for what we're doing. There's no roadmap, and we're having to just make it up as we go along. And despite the fact that there's lots of instruction and lots of people who offer great advice about how to write a book, how to create a story, what story structure should be like, when we get right down to it, when the rubber meets the road, it's you and your keyboard and your computer screen, and that's it. Nobody can do the work for you. And so that's uncomfortable as well. You're really stepping into the unknown, and a lot of these kind of uncomfortable feelings are going to be stirred up. And as I say, many of them might be completely unconscious to you. You might not even be aware of them. So what's your brain going to do in this situation? It's going to tell you to avoid your writing chair, right? Problem solved. If you've got all these uncomfortable feelings and you don't go to your writing chair, well, then that's an easy solution. That means that you don't have to face any of those things that you've been feeling and address them. It means that you won't have to feel vulnerable. You won't have to open yourself up to criticism. So it's a pretty simple solution that your brain is offering to you when you're thinking of sitting down to write and then feeling those uncomfortable feelings. So I just want to point out that a lot of this may be happening kind of at a level that you're not even aware of. So you might not be deliberately procrastinating. You might not be making the conscious decision to avoid your writing chair, but I'm pretty convinced that all of this that I've described is what's going on in the background for you. And so when we do this, when we avoid our writing chair, that pressure that we might have been feeling to write eases off a little bit. We sort of convince ourselves that, well, you know what, I can come back and I can do it tomorrow. If I was supposed to write 500 words today, what I'll do is I'll just write 1,000 words tomorrow, and I'll kind of make up for lost time. But you may find too that, similar to the analogy we used before about staying off Facebook, or not eating a cookie when you're trying to diet, what you may find is that you're caught then in a bit of a problem-solving loop where you avoid your writing chair, and then at some time later, an hour later, half a day later, your brain will start to berate you for that. And now what it's trying to do is solve the problem of getting your book written, right? So now you're faced with a different problem. You didn't write your words today, and so it's going to be upset with you about that because that was something that you said that you wanted to do. So I just want you to think a little bit about your experience when you're avoiding your writing chair, or when you're getting there and not writing as much as you maybe wanted to, and see if you can notice some of these things happening. It is going to be subtle, and I think this is something that has, of course, followed writers throughout history, just this problem-solving nature of our brain. So it's not you that's causing this problem. And remember, we talked about this quote from Sean Coyne, and this is a perfect example of how that quote fits in. You are not the problem. And in this case, really, it's your brain trying to be supportive in a way. It's not trying to harm you. It's actually trying to make your life easier and solve problems for you. So that's really what's going on when you're avoiding putting your bum in your chair, and we're going to talk about this more in the next lesson, when you're getting there and not doing as much writing as you'd like to do. And so one thing too that I want to point out is that this never stops. So just knowing about this problem-solving nature of your brain and how it's going to try to help you by preventing you from sitting down in your writing chair so that you're not feeling vulnerable and uncomfortable, that strategy on behalf of your brain never stops. I mean, I can speak from personal experience, having been a writer now for 10 or 12 years. It still happens to me. Sometimes I do get caught up in it. That doesn't happen as often as it used to because I'm aware now of what's going on. But I do notice that each and every day, there is a slight bit of discomfort when I'm going to my writing chair, and my brain is still trying to convince me that it would be better, therefore, if I just stayed out of that writing chair. And so this is what Stephen Pressfield is referring to when he talks about resistance in The War of Art and his other books. So what he means when he speaks about the knight and the dragon and having to meet them every single day, or having to meet the dragon, this is why. It's because your brain is a problem-solving machine, and it's not going to drop that function that it has simply because you want to be creative. It was designed, as we talked about very early on, to solve problems, and it's going to continue to do that. So you're going to feel that resistance every day. But what's really great is that when we have a greater awareness of what's going on with us and with our brains, we can observe what's happening and then make an informed choice to do something different. So what's changed now for you, having listened to this lesson, is that you're now more conscious of what's going on when you're avoiding your writing chair. It's not just that you might judge yourself for being lazy or for being a procrastinator or for not being as creative as other writers that you observe. That's not at all what's going on. It's simply that your brain is trying to solve a problem. And so now that you know that, getting your bum in your chair, hopefully, that's the intention of this lesson, should be much easier. So this is the beginning then of that gap that I talked about earlier that we're trying to create between you and your thinking. So I just want to create a little bit of space so that you can see what's going on when you're avoiding your writing chair, and not blame yourself for that, but simply be observing it. And so every writer, from what I've been able to observe, I think every writer who is able to consistently put their bum in their chair and get their writing done has figured out a way to observe what's going on with themselves and then get their writing done anyway. And they may not put it in exactly the words that I've put it into in this lesson, and Stephen Pressfield obviously calls it resistance. And other people would call it different things. But I think what's really going on is that any writer who is able to be consistently productive has been able to create that little gap between themselves, their true self that wants to write a book, and their thinking. And they're able to see those two things almost as separate entities and not take their thinking about their writing so personally. That's a real key as well. So those feelings of resistance, the feelings of vulnerability are going to feel extremely real, of course. That discomfort when we're creating something out of nothing feels incredibly real. But when we're able to see that that's simply a function of our problem-solving brain, then we're able to create that tiny little bit of space between our true selves and our thinking. So I hope that's been helpful for you. And what I recommend is actually that you might want to listen to this lesson more than once, just to kind of get used to the ideas that I'm sharing here, because it's a little bit different than the normal sort of just do it approach. But it's the thing that's really changed everything for me and enabled me to be a much more productive writer. And so in the next module and the next lesson, we're going to talk about your typing problem. We're going to address that. And some of the ideas are similar, and some of them are a little bit similar to this module, and some of them are new as well. So I'll meet you in there. See you then.